Hi and welcome to this Wednesday live workshop. If you didn't join in last time, we covered everything about bamboo. So do go back and have a look at those archives if you want to know a bit more about how you work with bamboo, how you cut it and create things and so on. So that was all covered in our last workshop. This workshop is a bit more component focused. So it's to try and get you making the right choices for your bike so that you create the best bike you can, okay? So what I'm going to discuss today is I'm going to go through forks, how to pick the right fork for your bike if you're building a gravel, mountain bike, road, track frame. And I'm just going to talk those through. If you're at home and you're relaxed and you finish work, I'm going to help myself to a beer if you want to do the same, or a glass of wine or fruit juice, whatever you fancy. Celebrating Wednesday, halfway through the work week, so I'm going to have one. Today we've got a Notting Hill Pale, so it's from a local London brewery, just to let everyone know. I've never tried it before, so I picked it up this morning. And Robert's saying we're off focus, but I don't know if I can do a lot about it. So I'm just going to pop it in the bamboo. And if you missed last week, I kind of talked about how waterproof bamboo was. So I've just popped my beer in there. So I'll pop that there. And I've got a mega piece of bamboo for beer today. So I'll drink that as I go. So just to run through, we're going to talk about forks. So what is a fork? Firstly, a fork is something like this, and this will fit into the front of the frame here. Okay? And it all looks quite simple, but obviously depending what bike you build, it's going to be different. So I've got a drawing behind me, so I'm going to very quickly run through some key measurements that you want to consider when you're choosing a fork, okay? So, one key thing is this measurement, and that's from the axle to the crown. So it's this position to this position, and it's known as the axle to crown. And every fork, depending on the type of fork, it will vary, okay? And that means that it really determines what size tyre you can fit in and what wheel size you can fit in the fork, okay? So just to give you an idea, a mountain bike, which is an example here, will be 480 mil. A gravel frame will be at least 390 mil, and a road frame will be anything from 370 to 380, okay? And I've got different forks to show you examples as we go, but just to give you an idea. So that's the measurement here. The other thing we've got here is the steerer length, so that's the steerer. And what that will determine is how high up you can have your handlebar. So the steerer is from here to here. So that's a really key consideration in choosing your fork. The final thing to consider really is the type of steerer. So I've got two examples here. I've got a straight steerer, which is this one here, and you can see it goes all the way up. And I've got a tapered. So these are two considerations when you're picking your fork. Okay, so those are some introduction to forks. What I'm going to run through next is just the fork material, okay, and what type of materials that you can buy a fork in, and why you'd consider these different types of materials, okay. So, you've got a carbon fork. Everyone's familiar with a carbon. These are going to be really lightweight, so if you want a lightweight frame, that's a good choice. If you want light steering, also a good choice, and it's also really well suited for strength and so on. So if you're building a road bike, I'd really think about a carbon fork. If you're building a touring frame and you want to go a bit more off-road, you're going around the world, I'd think about a steel fork, and that's because you can repair it, it's really robust, and you can tend to fit all the components you need to. So if you've just joined us, I'm just running through forks. And if you want a good quality but you want to spend a bit less money, then I'd have a look at an aluminium fork. So it's still going to be lightweight, but it's going to be a bit more affordable than carbon. So they're the different types of frame materials. Obviously, some of you are going to ask, can you make bamboo forks? So yes, you can make bamboo forks, and that's something we've done in the past. So you can make them however you want then if you make bamboo ones. But I'm really just going to talk about what forks are on the market today and what will be compatible for your frame build at home. So the other big consideration that I've talked about is the different types of steerers and whether it will work on your frame. So as I said, we've got a tapered and we've got a straight steerer. So a tapered will not be compatible with every type of frame, and you need to be really careful. If you don't have the right head tube, it's not going to work with a tapered head tube, okay? So what we do here is we've got 44mm, and that will fit perfectly into the tapered, and you can easily buy an external bearing that will fit in and fit around the tapered bearing. So just be really careful with the type of fork that you pick, whether it will be compatible with your frame. Okay, so the types that we look for, we've got a tapered or a straight steerer. So those are your two considerations. Normally if you're picking a disc fork, so if you're looking at disc, you're going to need a tapered fork. Okay, so if you just join me, I'm just running through forks. And as I mentioned, we've got the Notting Hill pail today, and as I went through last workshop, we're looking at bamboo and its versatility. I've got a beer mug here and it's not leaking. If you've got any questions, I'm going to try and cover some of them in the end. So just bear with me. I'm going to do another 20 minutes on forks. I'm going to try and talk about how you choose the right fork. The other real key consideration is the type of tyre you're going to fit. The worst thing to do is you pick a fork and you cannot fit the right size tyre into your fork. If you're doing world touring or if you're doing off-roading, you really want to consider a wider tyre, and that's going to provide comfort. And if you pick the wrong fork, you're not going to have that clearance. And I'll again give you some examples. So this is a mountain bike ready fork. So you can see very simply the clearance here will allow you a really, really big tyre. And if you pick the wrong fork, you're not going to be able to fit the large tyre size. So just be really careful. And this is more concerning when you're picking like a road one like this. You can see how narrow this is in here. So say you started with a narrow tyre and you suddenly felt, hang on, I'm doing a bit more rough riding, track riding, you know, on canal trails and so on, and you wanted to increase the size of the tyre, you won't be able to do that with the fork you've picked. So just be really, really careful on the fork consideration. And the best way to be really careful, the simplest way, is just to measure the width of the fork here, okay? And if you measure that, and say you, very simply, if you want to fit a 28mm tyre, and this only measures 25, you know this fork isn't going to work. So just be really careful with selecting the right fork. And you'll see what I've got here is a gravel fork. You can see this width is a lot wider. So it's going to give you a lot more options in terms of the width of fork and what type of tyre you can run. Okay, so just be really careful. And when you pick a fork, I'd really create what size tyre you want, what type of frame you have, and consider all of those before you pick your fork, okay? So the next thing I'm going to cover is everyone knows with bikes that there's loads and loads of different brake types, okay? So there's loads and loads of different brakes. And what I want to do is try and help you to pick the right fork for the type of brake you want to use, okay? And this can get really, really tricky. We know that there are disc brakes, we know there's caliper brakes, we know there's cantilever brakes, and we know there's drum brakes. So there's already loads of different brakes, and if you don't pick the right fork, it's not going to be compatible with the brakes you've got on your bike. So if you've just joined us, I'm just running through forks, everything about forks, and I'm trying to let everyone know when they're picking a fork for their bike, what to consider, what to think about, what not to think about, and so on, okay? So I was just looking at brakes. I'm going to look at disc brakes first, okay? There are two main types of disc brakes on the market. There's what's known as a direct mount, which is this style, and these are most common in kind of high-end bikes. And there are this type, which are known as post mounts, and you can see very clearly they've got slightly different fittings, okay? And if you pick the wrong fork, these will not fit on that fork if they're not compatible with the type of disc brake you've got. So be really, really careful when you're thinking about the fork and the type of fitting. For example, you can see these mounts here, okay, here and here. These are for a post mount. So you can see that fitting on really well. So if you're looking and they've got these extruded bits, you know that's for a post mount. So it's this type of brake, disc brake, okay? Hopefully you can see through my hands. If you then have this fork and you want to fit this brake, it's going to be almost impossible, okay? It's just not going to work. So if you're using a direct mount with a post mount fork, that's not going to be compatible. A post mount fork, or rather a direct mount fork, has these fittings here, and you can see it's completely flat rather than extruded. So I'll just demo that to you guys. You can see the different mounts. And that will then fit directly onto this fork like so. Okay, so just to go through that one more time. Post mount will have extruded bits like this, and you can fit that directly on, and that will work perfectly. Direct mount, which looks like this, will have a flat surface like this, and that will fit directly on here. You cannot cross compatibility. So just remember, if you're using direct mount, you need one fork, and if you need a post mount, you need another fork. Okay, so that's disc brakes. The other option we looked at was caliper brakes. So I've got two examples of caliper brakes. Okay, going back to axle and crown, so this length here, you need to make sure that it's not too long so that your caliper will meet the wheel. So this fitting here, you need to check that this length is correct with the tyre. Okay, so if it's too long, the caliper won't grip the tyre. Okay, so just make sure that you check the length of the caliper. So you can see on these two, they've both got a caliper mount, but this one is a lot longer. So you need to make sure you check this. And you'll see I've got a different size caliper that's longer and will fit with this fork. So if you check the length here, you'll know exactly if the caliper you have will fit on the fork. Okay, so that's caliper mounts. Okay, just to go through, I'm talking about forks here, and I've just covered braking. We've talked about disc brakes, and if you're using direct mount brakes or post mounts, they're two different disc types, you'll need a different type of fork. If you're using a caliper brake, make sure that the length is correct in terms of where the caliper meets the wheel, okay? So hopefully that's making sense. Lots of different options. I'm just trying to cover those so that you understand a little bit. When you're building your kit, you know what to do. If you're unsure on forks, drop us an email. Or if you look at our component packs on our website, there's pre-selected forks that match up exactly to the type of components. So if you're unsure, just have a look on our website, the pre-selected components. Okay, so we've covered brakes. A little bit simpler, I'm going to look at things like mudguards. So if you want to fit mudguards, i.e. you don't want to get mud all over you and water and so on, you need to make sure that your fork has got these mudguard mounts. So for those of you that can see these little eyelets, if they haven't got those mounts, you're not going to be able to fit mudguards. So just think about this, and this is really thinking about what your bike's going to be. Do you want disc brakes? Do you want mudguards? And all those things. And then making sure that you pick the right fork or get advice on the fork, and we can help you. And try and decide what will work for you. Okay? So that's mudguards. The final thing to really think about is that if you're doing a world tour, or you want to travel at, a greater distance, or you want to do backpacking weekends or anything like that, make sure that the fork you pick is also compatible with pannier racks, okay? So an example here on this fork, so we've got a little fit in here, and that means we're able to fit pannier racks and so on. So make sure that the fork has got eyelets and fittings with pannier racks. If you want recommendations, have a look at the Surly range of forks. You make really good steel forks, and they've got loads of options for bike packing and travelling. If you've got questions, let me know. I'm going to run through questions at the end and try and make sure that everyone understands all about forks and all the different options. Just to summarise, I've talked about the axle to crown measurement. So the height of that is really important depending on what you're going to build. I've talked about the type of brake, so make sure you think about the brake for your fork. Also, if you want to fit mudguards, make sure you have a think if the fork has got the fitting on for mudguards. And if you're doing a pannier rack, so if you want to fit racks and water holders or anything like that, check that your fork has that fitting, okay? So those are all checklists you want to start writing when you pick your fork, okay? I'm going to run through a few more things, and then I'm going to do a summary at the end, so that depending on what type of bike you build, I'm going to tell you exactly what to look out for in that fork. Okay. So the final thing I'm going to run through, as I said, is I'm going to run through just a quick summary. So if you've got really confused, I'm going to try and bring you back in and try and explain everything to you. Okay. So if you are building a gravel bike, so if you want to go off-road, if you want to fit disc brakes, and then this is what you want to pick, okay? So this fork, it's got a wide width here for a wide tyre. So you want at least 40 to 50 mil tyre clearance. So if you add this to a checklist, 40 to 50 mil tyre clearance. You want disc brake mounts so that you can fit disc brakes, okay? You also want to have fittings for any pannier or mudguards as an option. You don't have to, but some people, if they're off-roading, might want that. You want an axle to crown. So axle to crown is this point here to the end of around 390 to 380 millimeters, so that you've got room, and that will allow a larger tyre and it will allow clearance for mud. And the final thing you want to try and look for is around the steerer. You want to get a tapered steerer, because that increases the diameter here and increases the overall strength of the fork. So for gravel, that's what you want to do. Axle to crown 380 to 390, disc brake fittings, and then also a tapered steerer. So that's for gravel, okay? If you're doing a road bike and you want to go quicker, you want really slick handling, and you want to go really lightweight, you want an axle to crown of between 370 and 380, so shorter so the wheel is closer to the frame. You want to make sure that it's a lightweight fork, so I'd recommend either a carbon or an aluminium fork. You don't want to get heavy steel, because if you're climbing and so on, that's going to be heavier. You want to think about mudguards, so if it's got mudguard mounts, that might be useful if you're commuting with your road bike. And then for the steerer, you either want a straight, which is this one, or you want a tapered steerer. So that's for a road frame. If you are building a hybrid, you probably want closest to the gravel fork. So you want a larger tyre clearance, axle to crown of 380 to 370, and then you also want to make sure for a hybrid that you have mudguard and rack mounts, okay? And then obviously think about what brakes, if you want disc or if you want caliper. So just make sure that they've got those fittings. The final one to think about is mountain bikes. There's two options for mountain bikes, just to run through. So a suspension, so that obviously if you're going over bumps and lumps, you've got suspension, so it's improved comfort. And that would be a 480 axle to crown. Wide clearance for the tyre, so you can fit in a massive tyre. Disc brake mounts are a must, so make sure you've got those on the mountain bike. And so that's the other option for a mountain bike, if you're doing trekking, bike packing, is the same axle to crown, but it's rigid, okay? So it's for more kind of lighter trails and so on. Again, you want the disc mounts. And finally, think about through axle and so on. So that's a whole other area of conversation. So hopefully you guys now have a better idea of the different types of forks to pick. I'll just run through a final checklist. What brakes do you want to do? Do you want mudguards? Do you want to fit panniers? And what tyre size do you want? Those are the key things to think about when you're picking a fork. And if you know what those items you want are, you'll get the right fork for your bike. If you don't, you're going to struggle, because even in a year you might go, oh, I want a wider tyre, I want this, and it's difficult. So try and create that checklist before picking a fork. If you're unsure and you need guidance, we've got part packs on our website, so you can see all our pre-selected forks that match up with the disc brakes and so on. And the other thing you can do is just drop us a direct message after this and say, James, I've got this fork. Do you think it's a good fork, or do you think it will work? And we can very, very quickly tell you whether it's good or not and what to consider. If anyone wants a fork, I've got lots of forks in the workshop, and if you're at home and you're building a home build kit and you need a fork for your kit, I've got some wonderful offers on used forks or forks that we've got in the workshop that will be starting at £30 and upwards. Drop us an email and we can have a look at our used rack of forks, and that's in the workshop. We can go, oh yeah, we've got these, we can do you a deal on these, and we'll make sure it all works with your kit as well. If you've got questions, I'm going to have a look at questions now. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday workshop. The next workshop we're going to do is going to be all about biocomposites. So it's going to be how you join bamboo together and how you use flax fibres and epoxy resins and so on. So we're going to really focus on the frame in the next workshop. This one was about components. Our next one is going to really be about frame building again and going through some of our processes, best techniques and so on. If you've got any questions, I'm going to have a quick look at the questions now and come around and have a look.
This one is from Instagram.
Okay. So we've got a question on Instagram, and that is any advice on brakes on a tandem. Okay. So if you're building a tandem, you want quite a lot of brake power. And normally what is standard on new tandems now is a disc brake. So I'd recommend on a tandem disc brakes. If you're using a disc brake, you're probably going to want to use a hydraulic disc brake, and I recommend probably using a mountain bike grade disc brake. And that probably is going to be a post mount. Okay, so it's going to be this type of disc brake, which means you probably want to find a fork like this. So it's got the post mount fittings, and you also probably want a larger tyre. So I would look, if you're building a tandem at home, I'd look at a gravel fork, because it's going to have really good strength, it's going to have the fittings. The only problem you may have, which I'd probably recommend looking, if you look at SJS Cycles, they do a lot of tandem specific forks. They've got double crowns and extra strength. So just to reiterate, you're going to want a post mount disc, mountain bike setup, so a wider tyre, and you're going to look for a really strong fork. So if you look at SJS Cycles, they do a tandem ready fork, and if you need help on that, just drop me an email and I can give you the recommendations on that.
From Robert, Facebook. Very few straight steer mountain bike forks.
Yes. So what Robert has mentioned here is the steerer. So this type of steerer here. And what they tend to always do with a mountain bike is they tend to use a tapered. So you can see on this one that I've been referring to, we've got a wide tapered fork. So you're going to need to make sure that the frame you have is compatible with a tapered headset. so this wider one, and that's basically 95% of mountain bike forks will be tapered. So if you're building a mountain bike, you want a tapered fork, and we offer a tapered steerer, so that comes with our frame build kit, so that makes it really compatible with all mountain bike forks. So yes, I definitely, if you're building a mountain bike, you need a tapered fork and you'll need a tapered head tube. So if you're looking at building at home, just get in touch and we can refer you to the correct setup, bearings and so on. But yes, very good point from Robert that it's very difficult to find a non-tapered fork for road.
Tim, how much clearance would you advise?
So thanks for getting in touch, Tim. In terms of clearance, it really depends on the type of tyre you're going to fit. So I would start on what type of tyre. So for example, if you want a 32mm tyre, you're going to want quite a lot of clearance in terms of mud, grit and so on. So you're probably going to want a 40mm width around this part of fork, okay? So if you haven't got 40mm, I wouldn't fit a larger tyre than a 28mm, for example. So again, write out exactly what tyre you want and make sure you pick the correct fork for that, and that will give you the clearance automatically. If you go for a road fork and then you try and fit a gravel tyre, so a really wide tyre, that's never going to work and you're never going to get the correct clearance. So it's really about determining the type of tyre you want and matching it to a fork, and then you'll get the right clearance. If the measurements don't add up, walk away. That's what I'd say. Just make sure you cross-check all the measurements and the width of the tyre, which is a very simple measurement: width of tyre, width of fork, and cross-check those. And if the numbers don't add up, that fork is not going to work for you. Okay?
Someone's asked if there's no beer in the bamboo cup today.
There is beer. I went for an oversized cup, and there is beer in. So, cheers. Hopefully, if you're at home, it's Wednesday. We're halfway through the week, so cheers. There is beer. I've been talking so much. I've been trying to keep everyone entertained that I haven't stopped to have a drink. So I'll have a drink. There are. I've got a different cup today. I'm going to make a different cup, and I'm going to try and add a handle and show you a bit how you can craft. I might do a workshop live session on how you can make your own beer cup. So if you want me to do that, then just let me know. Add a comment and I'll do how you make a bamboo beer cup. Okay, coming to a hipster bar near you, I'm sure. Any other questions on forks? So that's what we've covered today, is forks in our Wednesday workshop. And that's really just, if you are considering building a bike and you want the perfect setup, try and pick the right fork for your setup, because there's loads of variations out there. And that's something we can help with if you get in touch. If you don't get in touch, then we can't help you. So please stay in touch, send us emails, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you want to do. Just drop us a quick message and go, James, will this fork work? And we can get back to you. As I said, the next workshop's going to be on composite materials. So we're going to talk about how you use flax fibre to join a bamboo frame together. So we're going to share some tips and hints of how to work really well with composite. I'd just like to thank everyone for tuning into this live session. We will be doing one, we'll release the date very soon of the next one. But as I said, thanks for tuning in. If you've got any more questions on forks, feel free to comment. But hopefully this kind of gave you a quick insight into some of the fork options and what to think about. Thanks again. I'm going to end this session now, and I will look out for any emails on forks. Okay, thank you very much.